Welcome back for part 4 of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. It's been a while and I've had a lot of events in my life. I had nose surgery for one, so I can breathe better, which will help me to not fall asleep and have a loss of blood oxygen while I'm trying to read, which was a considerable impairment to me before. I feel much better now. It's an incredible difference. So without further ado, I will continue to the end of the appendix, and I'll say a couple words about the importance of this document. And the continent hesitating on a matter, which will be her final ruin if neglected. It is the commerce and not the conquest of America by which England is to be benefited, and that would be in a great measure continue were the countries as independent of each other as France and Spain, because in many articles neither can go to a better market. But it is the independence of this country of Britain or any other, which is now the main and only object worthy of contention, and which, like all other truths discovered by necessity, will appear clearer and stronger every day. First, because it will come to that one time or other. Secondly, because the longer it is delayed, the harder it will be to accomplish. I have frequently amused myself both in public and private companies with silently remarking the specious errors of those who speak without reflecting. And among the many which I have heard, the following seems the most general, viz., that had this rupture happened 40 or 50 years hence, instead of now, the continent would have been more able to have shaken off the dependence. To which I reply that our military ability at this time arises from the experience gained in the last war, and which in 40 or 50 years' time would have been totally extinct. The continent would not, by that time, have had a general or even a military officer left, and we or those who may succeed us would have been as ignorant of material matters as the ancient Indians. And this single position, closely attended to, will unanswerably prove that the present time is preferable to all others. The argument turns thus. At the conclusion of the last war, we had experience, but wanted numbers, and 40 or 50 years hence we should have numbers without experience. Wherefore, the proper point of time must be some particular point between the two extremes, in which a sufficiency of the former remains, and the proper increase of the latter is obtained, and that point of time is the present time. The reader will pardon this digression, as it does not properly come under the head I first set out with, and to which I again return by the following position, viz. Should affairs be patched up with Britain, and she to remain the governing and sovereign power of America, which, as matters are now circumstanced, is giving up the point entirely, we shall deprive ourselves of the very means of sinking the debt we have, or may contract. The value of the back lands, which some of the provinces are clandestinely depraved of, by the unjust extension of the limits of Canada, valued only at £5 sterling per 100 acres, amount to upwards of 25 millions. Pennsylvania currency, and the quit rents at 1 penny sterling per acre to 2 millions yearly. It is by the sale of those lands that the debt may be sunk, without burthen to any, and the quit rent reservation thereon will always lessen, and in time will wholly support the yearly expense of government. It matters not how long the debt is in paying, so that the lands, when sold, be applied to the discharge of it, and for the execution of which the Congress, for the time being, will be continental trustees. I proceed now to the second head, viz., which is the easiest and most practicable plan, reconciliation or independence, with some occasional remarks. He who takes nature for this guide is not easily beaten out of his argument. And on that ground, I answer generally that independence being a single simple line contained within ourselves, and reconciliation a matter exceedingly perplexed and complicated, and in which a treacherous, capricious court is to interfere, gives the answer without a doubt. The present state of America is truly alarming to every man who is capable of reflection. Without law, without government, without any other mode of power than what is founded on, and granted by courtesy, held together by an unexampled concurrence of sentiment, which is nevertheless subject to change, and which every secret enemy is endeavoring to dissolve. Our present condition is legislation without law, wisdom without a plan, constitution without a name, and, what is strangely astonishing, perfect independence contending for dependence. The instance is without a precedent. The case never existed before, and who can tell what may be the event? The property of no man is secure in the present unbraced system of things. The mind of the multitude is left at random, and seeing no fixed object before them, they pursue such a fancy or opinion starts. Nothing is criminal. There is no such thing as treason. Wherefore, everyone thinks himself at liberty to act as he pleases. The Tories dared not have assembled offensively, had they known that their lives, by that act, were forfeited to the laws of the state. A line of distinction should be drawn between English soldiers taken in battle and inhabitants of America taken in arms. The first are prisoners, but the latter traitors. The one forfeits his liberty, the other his head. Notwithstanding our wisdom, there is a visible feebleness in some of our proceedings which gives encouragement to dissensions. The continental belt is too loosely buckled, and if something is not done in time, it will be too late to do anything, and we shall fall into a state in which neither reconciliation nor independence will be practicable. The king and his worthless adherents are got at their old game of dividing the continent, and there are not wanting among us printers who will be busy in spreading specious falsehoods. The artful and hypocritical letter which appeared a few months ago in two of the New York papers, and likewise in two others, is an evidence that there are men who want neither judgment or honesty. It is easy getting into holes and corners and talking of reconciliation. But do such men seriously consider how difficult the task is, and how dangerous it may prove, should the continent divide thereon? Do they take within their view all the various orders of men whose situation and circumstances, as well as their own, are to be considered therein? Do they put themselves in the place of the sufferer who all is already gone, and of the soldier who hath quitted all for the defense of his country? If their ill-judged moderation be suited to their own private situations only, regardless of others, the event will convince them that they are reckoning without their hosts. Put us, say some, on the footing we were on in 63. To which I answer, the request is not now in the power of Britain to comply with, neither will she propose it. But if it were, and even should be granted, I ask, as a reasonable question, by what means is such a corrupt and faithless court to be kept to its engagements? Another parliament, nay, even the present, may hereafter repeal the obligation, on the pretense of its being violently obtained or unwisely granted, and in that case, where is our redress? No going to law with nations, cannon are the barristers of crowns, and the sword, not of justice, but of war, decides the suit. To be on the footing of 63 is not sufficient, that the laws only be put on the same state, but that our circumstances likewise be put on the same state. Our burnt and destroyed towns repaired or built up, our private losses made good, our public debts contracted for defense discharged. Otherwise, we shall be millions worse than we were at the inviolable period. Such a request, had it been complied with a year ago, would have won the heart and soul of the continent. But now it is too late. The Rubicon is passed. Besides, the taking up of arms, merely to enforce the repeal of pecuniary laws, seems as unwarrantable by the divine law, and as repugnant to human feelings, as the taking up of arms to enforce obedience thereto. The object on either side doth not justify the ways and means, for the lives of men are too valuable to be cast away on such trifles. It is the violence which is done and threatened to our persons, the destruction of our property by an armed force, the invasion of our country by fire and sword, which conscientiously disqualifies the use of arms, and the instant in which such a mode of defense became necessary, all subjection to Britain ought to have ceased, and the independency of America should have been considered as dating its era from, and published by, the first musket that was fired against her. This line is a line of consistency, neither drawn by caprice nor extended by ambition, but produced by a chain of events, of which the colonies were not the authors. I shall conclude these remarks with the following timely and well-intended hints. We ought to reflect that there are three different ways by which an independency may hereafter be effected, and that one of those three will one day or other be the fate of America, viz., by the legal voice of the people of Congress, by a military power, or by a mob. It may not always happen that our soldiers are citizens, and the multitude of a body of reasonable men. Virtue, as I have already remarked, is not hereditary, neither is perpetual. Should an independency be brought about by the first of those means, we have every opportunity and every encouragement before us to form the noblest, purest constitution on the face of the earth. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand, and the race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains, are to receive their portion of freedom from the event of a few months. The reflection is awful, and in its point of view, how trifling, how ridiculous, do the little paltry cavillings of a few weak or interested men appear, when weighed against the business of a world. Should we neglect the present favorable and inviting period, and an independence be hereafter effected by any other means, we must charge the consequence to ourselves, or to those, rather, whose narrow and prejudiced souls are habitually opposing with the measure, without either inquiring or reflecting. There are reasons to be given in support of independence, which men should rather privately think of than be publicly told of. We ought not now to be debating whether we shall be independent or not, but anxious to accomplish it on a firm, secure, and honorable basis, and uneasy rather that it is not yet begun upon. Every day convinces us of its necessity. Even the Tories, if such beings yet remain among us, should, of all men, be the most solicitous to promote it. For, as the appointment of committees at first protected them from popular rage, so a wise and well-established form of government will be the only certain means of continuing it securely to them. Wherefore, if they have not virtue enough to be Whigs, they ought to have prudence enough to wish for independence. In short, independence is the only bond that can tie and keep us together. We shall then see our object, and our ears will be legally shut against the schemes of an intriguing as well as cruel enemy. We shall then too be on a proper footing to treat with Britain, for there is reasonable to conclude that the pride of that court will be less hurt by treatings with the American states for terms of peace than with those whom she denominates rebellious subjects for terms of accommodation. It is our delaying it that encourages her to hope for conquest, and our backwardness tends only to prolong the war. As we have, without any good effect therefrom, held our trade to obtain a redress of our grievances, let us now try the alternative, by independently redressing them ourselves, and then offering to open trade. The mercantile and reasonable part of England will be still with us, because peace with trade is preferable to war without it. And if this offer be not accepted, other courts may be applied to. On these grounds I rested the matter, and as no author hath yet been made to refute the doctrine contained in the former editions of this pamphlet. It is a negative proof that either the doctrine cannot be refuted, or that the party in favor of it are too numerous to be opposed. Wherefore, instead of gazing at each other with suspicious or doubtful curiosity, let each of us hold out to his neighbor the hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing a line which, like an act of oblivion, shall bury in forgetfulness every former dissension. Let the names of Whig and Tory be extinct, and let none other than be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind, and the free and independent states of America. To the representatives of the religious society of the people called Quakers, or to so many of them as were concerned in publishing a late piece entitled, The Ancient Testimony and Principles of the People called Quakers Renewed, with respect to the King and Government, and touching the commotions now prevailing in these and other parts of America, addressed to the people in general. The writer of this is one of those few who never dishonors religion, either by ridiculing or caviling at any denomination whatsoever. To God and not to man are all men accountable on the score of religion. Wherefore this epistle is not so properly addressed to you as a religious, but as a political body, dabbling in matters which the professed quietude of your principles instruct you not to meddle with. As you have, without a proper authority for so doing, put yourselves in the place of the whole body of Quakers, so the writer of this, in order to be on an equal rank with yourselves, is under the necessity of putting himself in the place of all those who approve the very writings and principles against which your testimony is directed. And he hath chosen this singular situation in order that you might discover in him that presumption of character which you cannot see in yourselves. For neither he nor you have any claim or title to political representation. When men have departed from the right way, it is no wonder that they stumble and fall. And it is evident from the manner in which ye have managed your testimony, that politics, as a religious body of men, is not your proper walk. For however well adapted it might appear to you, it is, nevertheless, a jumble of good and bad put unwisely together, and the conclusion drawn therefrom both unnatural and unjust. The first 2 pages, and the whole doth not make 4, we give you credit for, and expect the same civility from you, because the love and desire of peace is not confined to Quakerism. It is the natural as well as the religious wish of all denominations of men, and on this ground, as men laboring to establish an independent constitution of our own, do we exceed all others in our hope and end and aim. Our plan is peace forever. We are tired of contention with Britain, and we see no real end to it but in a final separation. We act consistently because, for the sake of introducing an endless and uninterrupted peace, we do bear the evils and burthens of the present day. We are endeavoring, and will steadily continue to endeavor, to separate and to dissolve the connection which hath already filled our land with blood, and which, while the name of it remains, will be the fatal cause of future mischiefs to both countries. We fight neither for revenge nor conquest, neither from pride nor passion. We are not insulting the world with our fleets and armies, or ravaging the globe for plunder. Beneath the shade of our own vines are we attacked, in our own houses, and on our own lands. Is the violence committed against us? We view our enemies in the character of highwaymen and housebreakers, having no defense for ourselves in the civil law, or obliged to punish them by the military one, and apply the sword. In the very case where you have before now applied the halter, perhaps we feel for the ruined and insulted sufferers in all and every part of the continent, with a degree of tenderness which hath not yet made its way into some of your bosoms. But ye be sure that ye mistake not the cause and ground of your testimony. Call not coldness of soul religion, nor put the bigot in the place of the Christian. O ye partial ministers of your own acknowledged principles! If the bearing arms be sinful, the first going to war must be more so. By all the difference between willful attacks and unavoidable defense. Wherefore, if you really preach from conscience, and mean not to make a political hobby horse of your religion, convince the world thereof, by proclaiming your doctrine to our enemies, for they likewise bear arms. Give us proof of your sincerity by publishing it at St. James, to the commanders-in-chief at Boston, to the admirals and captains who are piratically ravaging our coasts, and to all the murdering miscreants who are acting in authority under him whom ye profess to serve. Had ye the honest soul of Barclay, ye would preach repentance to your king. You would tell the royal wretch his sins and warn him of eternal ruin. You would not spend your partial invectives against the injured and the insulted only, but like faithful ministers would cry aloud and spare none. Say not that ye are persecuted, neither endeavor to make us the authors of that reproach, which ye are bringing upon yourselves. For we testify unto all men that we do not complain against you because we are Quakers, but because ye pretend to be and are not Quakers. Alas, it seems by the particular tendency of some part of your testimony, that other parts of your conduct, as if all sin were reduced to and comprehended in the act of bearing arms, and that the people only, and that by the people only, ye appear to us to have mistaken party for conscience, because the general tenor of your actions wants uniformity, and it is exceedingly difficult to us to give credit to many of your pretended scruples, because we see them made by the same men, who, in the very instant that they are exclaiming against the mammon of this world, are nevertheless hunting after it with a step as steady as time, and an appetite as keen as death. The quotation which ye have made from Proverbs in the 3rd page of your testimony, that when a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him, is very unwisely chosen on your part, because it amounts to a proof that the king's ways, whom ye are desirous of supporting, do not please the Lord. Otherwise his reign would be in peace. I now proceed to the latter part of your testimony, and that for which all the foregoing seems only an introduction, viz. It hath ever been our judgment and principle, since we were called to profess the light of Christ, manifested in our consciousness unto this day, that the setting up and putting down kings and governments is God's peculiar prerogative, for causes best unknown to himself, and that it is not our business to have any hand or contrivance therein, nor to be busybodies above our station, much less to plot and contrive the ruin and overturn any of them, but to pray for the king and safety of our nation, and good of all men, that we may live a peaceable and quiet life in all goodness and honesty, under the government which God is pleased to set over us. If these are really your principles, why do ye not abide by them? Why do ye not leave that which ye call God's work to be managed by himself? These very principles instruct you to wait with patience and humility for the event of all public measures, and to receive that event as the divine will towards you. Wherefore, what occasion is there for your political testimony if you fully believe what it contains? And the very publishing it proves that either ye do not believe what ye profess, or have not virtue enough to practice what ye believe. The principles of Quakerism have a direct tendency to make a man the quiet and inoffensive subject of any, and every government which is set over him, and if the setting up and putting down of kings and governments is God's peculiar prerogative, he most certainly will not be robbed thereof by us. Wherefore the principle itself leads you to approve of every king, which ever happened, or may happen to kings, as being his work. Oliver Cromwell thanks you. Charles, then, died not by the hands of men, and should the present proud imitator of him come to the same untimely end, the writers and publishers of the testimony are bound, by the doctrine it contains, to applaud the fact: kings are not taken away by miracles. Neither are changes in governments brought about by any other means than such as are common and human, and such as we are now using. Even the dispersion of the Jews, though foretold by our Saviour, was effected by arms. Wherefore, as ye refuse to be the means on one side, ye ought not to be the meddlers on the other, but to wait the issue in silence, and unless ye can produce divine authority, to prove that the Almighty, who hath created and placed this new world at the greatest distance it could possibly stand, east and west, from every part of the old, doth, nevertheless, disapprove of its being independent of the corrupt and abandoned court of Britain. Unless, I say, ye can show this, how can ye, on the ground of your principles, justify the exciting and stirring of the people, firmly to unite in the abhorrence of all such writings and measures as evidence a desire and design to break off the happy connection we have hitherto enjoyed with the kingdom of Great Britain, and our just and necessary subordination to the king, and those who are lawfully placed in authority under him? What a slap in the face is here! The men who, in the very paragraph before, have quietly and passively resigned up the ordering, altering, and disposal of kings and governments into the hands of God, are now recalling their principles and putting in for a share of the business. It is possible that the conclusion, which is here justly quoted, can anyways follow from the doctrine laid down. The inconsistency is too glaring not to be seen, the absurdity too great not to be laughed at, and such as could only have been made by those whose understandings were darkened by the narrow and crabby spirit of a despairing political party. For ye are not to be considered as the whole body of the Quakers, but only as a factional and fractional part thereof. Here ends the examination of your testimony, which I call upon no man to abhor, as ye have done, but only to read and judge of fairly. To which I subjoin the following remark: that the setting up and putting down of kings most certainly mean the making him a king who is yet not so, and the making him no king who is already one. And pray that hath this do in the present case. We neither mean to set up nor to put down, neither to make nor unmake, but to have nothing to do with them. Wherefore your testimony, in whatever light it is viewed, serves only to dishonor your judgment, and for many other reasons have better have been let alone than published. First, because it tends to be the decrease and reproach of all religion, whatever, and is of the utmost danger to society, to make it a party in political disputes. Secondly, because it exhibits a body of men, numbers of whom disavow the publishing political testimonies, as being concerned therein and approvers thereof. Thirdly, because it hath a tendency to undo that continental harmony and friendship which yourselves, by your late liberal and charitable donations, hath lent a hand to establish, and the preservation of which is the utmost consequence to us all. And here, without anger or resentment, I bid you farewell, sincerely wishing that as men and Christians ye may always fully and uninterruptedly enjoy every civil and religious right, and be, in your return, the means of securing it to others. But that the example which ye have unwisely set, of mingling religion with politics, may be disavowed and reprobated in every inhabitant of America. And this edition has a couple of quotes about common sense, which I will read because I thought that they were quite nice. This is by Thomas Jefferson. No writer has exceeded Thomas Paine in ease and familiarity of style, in perspicuity of expression, happiness of elucidation and in simple and unassuming language. Now, Thomas Jefferson got his copy of Common Sense in February, just 3 months before he started writing the Declaration of Independence. And you'll find that there is a lot of crossover between what you'll find in the Declaration of Independence and what you'll find written in Common Sense. So it had an immeasurable impact on the foundation of our nation, just in the decisions, the wording that Thomas Jefferson chose. Not to say that Thomas Jefferson was uniquely influenced by Common Sense, but it clearly had an effect on him. By Nicholas Creswell. A pamphlet called Common Sense makes a great noise, one of the vilest things that ever was published to the world, full of false representations, lies, calumny, and treason, whose principles are to subvert all kingly governments and erect an independent republic. Clearly not liked by the supporters of the king. This quote's from John Adams. I dreaded the effect so popular a pamphlet might have among the people, and determined to do all in my power to counteract the effect of it. He was our second president. Dr. Benjamin Rush, who's one of the people that I believe had more of a hand in this document than is let on. Its effects were sudden and extensive upon the American mind. It was read by public men. And by General Charles Lee. Have you read the pamphlet Common Sense? I never saw such a masterful performance. In short, I own myself convinced by the arguments of the necessity of separation. So Common Sense, by the time that it was published, was immensely influential. It convinced, like I said at the beginning of this mini-series, it convinced many Americans to join the cause. Within 3 months, 120,000 copies were circulating in the United States, or at that time it was just the colonies. But it was the second most widely read publication in the Western world, only behind the Bible. And Thomas Paine donated every single cent that he earned from that publication to the war effort to ensure that General Washington and the Continental Army could buy supplies for independence. By the end of the Revolutionary War, there was an estimated 500,000 copies that were circulating on the continent, which would make Common Sense at that time the most read printed document in American history. Of course, since then there has been more, but it clearly was the most influential document to hit America. And in Common Sense, he says that many times that we are on a precipice, and this is 1776, we're on a precipice of, or 1775 that he started writing it, of what could be the most influential nation, or even to change the world. And that's exactly what happened. Within just a year or two of the independence, Europe started to shift. The French people started to think about their own revolution. And now 200 years later, monarchies are almost completely gone, except for a few around the world. The ones in Europe certainly don't have the power. When I think of true monarchies in the modern world, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bhutan, Thailand, those are monarchies where the monarch has a lot more power, which is closer to what the monarchies in England, France, and Germany had at the time, although Germany wasn't quite a state as it was now, back during the Revolution. And we find ourselves in America in a time where a lot of Americans doubt the validity of our nation, or even believe that we're not living up to the values of what America was meant to be. And that just shows how weak of a historical education that people have received. Because the very fact that you're able to hold that opinion and those beliefs is due to the fact that you have those freedoms of expression, of belief. In America, you can believe anything you want. There's people that believe that the earth is flat in America, and they are allowed to have whatever kind of lives that they want. People in America have all sorts of religions and can hold office, fully professing those religions. That's not something that you could have in England. In England, you had to be under the Church of England. And albeit that there were fluctuations on whether or not you'd be put to death for being Catholic, or certainly put to death for being Muslim, and a English national. If you were visiting, you might have restrictions, but you were, of course, expected to leave. But certainly there was no freedoms like we have in America now. I could go on and on for how vast, how immense of a change this notion of freedom has had for the world. We've gone from essentially mud huts. Not everyone was in mud huts. Of course, we had cities back then, but out on the frontier in America, well, people still had mud huts. And now we have highways. We've gone to the moon. We have satellites. We have cell phones, that would be impossible to imagine. But that shows the importance of the freedoms that we have. And not only that, but if you consider the Bill of Rights, and just speaking on cell phones, for instance, the right to communicate was, they had letters back then that you could write someone with a letter, and you'd, of course, in the Constitution, there is a mail service that's prescribed for that letters. That's why we have the USPS. But cell phones weren't even considered to be a feasibility. And yet the First Amendment protects our right to communicate through them. Now, of course, the right of unlawful search and seizure has been infringed upon greatly over the last 200 years. And many of those rights have been hemmed and hawed at to the point where they're almost ignored. And that was something that was a great concern to the original Americans, is that they would establish these rights, but that the government and fellow citizens would do everything in their power to diminish those rights. So it's important for us to remember where we came from, and what we had, and what we have now, and what we'd like to have. We don't live in tyranny like there existed back then, but people in the world today do live in tyrannies that exist. And there's a lot of talk about that the people who are claiming that others are misinformed are by far the most misinformed themselves. Now, that's of course not true for everybody, but it's so common that it is alarming and a peculiar instance. And I find that it's entirely a tactic to stifle the free expression of speech and of voicing opinions and of personal beliefs, which is abhorrent and completely against American values. So, for instance, our previous president's Ministry of Truth, or whatever you wish to call it, and the call for many many legislators to have people who spread misinformation or disinformation or whatever they wanted to call it put in jail. We're very close to a dark path, and it affected all of us in many ways. And so currently there is a divide between many Americans. 70.5 million on the other side for the last election voted for a president who many find to have many foibles, let's just say that, and many flaws, and people call him a fascist, which by every measure of the term he's not. And on the other hand, we had the potential first, not the first female to run for presidency, but we had, a woman who got the Democratic Party nomination without a primary vote and had been denounced by her own party members for years at that point of how incapable she was, and by the media. And then they suddenly supported her as if she was the best thing in the world. And of course, this is not a support of one candidate or the other. It's just a pointing out of reality of how people who claim to be so sensible now support these candidates who, in many aspects, in almost every aspect, I'd say, would not have ever been able to get a vote, or ever, they would not have been candidates a decade ago, 20 years ago, 200 years ago, certainly not. If you look at the speeches of, someone who was reviled, Ronald Reagan, who a lot of people hated Reagan. They thought that he was a TV actor, he was a pro-Christian, militant, which were all true. He is far better of a candidate than what we've had put forward to us in any recent time. Carter, who also was considered a terrible candidate, a peanut farmer. What did he know? And his presidency was marked with what were called terrible decisions that some of them even impact us today, and that's how it is with presidential decisions. They extend far beyond their presidency. Carter was way better of a presidential candidate than we have nowadays, and so it's important for us to kind of think of where we are now and what we are risking by not informing ourselves and not making better decisions as a nation. Because we could very well have a King George III who is impressing people, which means that forcing people into the military against their will, or putting taxes that are so steep and in every single part of our lives that we can't afford to live, which is a state that we're currently in. So that's something that's already come to pass. So, like I said, I'm not supporting any party or any candidate, but I'm simply saying that as Americans, we have a nation which can change, a form of government which we can edit as we wish, and laws that we can alter as we wish, which is something that has not existed in all of human history like it does in our country, which makes it a very beautiful country. We should think about what we want in the future, what we want for our children. And we shouldn't hand them a state that is controlled by law enforcement and taxes, that's constantly going to war with the rest of the world. We should hand them a state where they're free to express themselves and believe whatever they want, so long as their beliefs don't force other people to live a certain way, and that they can be profitable and not have to work every single day just to survive. And many people, are working 3 jobs and barely cutting it, which is not something that has happened in the past. I mean, maybe in days of slavery. So there are a lot of analogs to previous enslavement and debt enslavement, which is a concept that was first rolled out in the 1850s and tested in Russia in 1865 with their emancipation of the serfs, where you had generational debt that serfs had to pay off to the previous lords and even the children of those lords to buy land to live on. And I think in the future I'll make a video on the conversion of slavery to debt slavery. But to conclude this video, we have a beautiful nation that our forefathers fought for so that we could express ourselves in any way that we wish and not be put in jail and not be dragged out by a mob and killed for those beliefs. And there's many Americans today that believe that both should happen. And I think that's a travesty, and I think that there should be more of a focus on history education in our schools so that people might be more sympathetic to those that completely disagree with them, or people's beliefs that they completely disagree with. Because the key factor of a healthy society is that you can exist with someone that you don't like or that you disagree with, but you still value their right for independence and their right for freedom and liberty. And that is what America is made of: valuing other people and their liberty, and not forcing your beliefs on them. And with that, good night, and thank you for joining me.